talking to
Good eye contact. It's kind of creeping me out a little bit. It's very direct.
Yeah.
Okay, well, it's 8 o'clock. Should we jump in?
Let's do it.
All right. Well, welcome everyone who's joining us here online for this live conversation with the cast of Ted & Company's new show, Discovery, a Comic Lament. I'm Hannah Heinzekehr, and I'm the Executive Director of The Mennonite, Inc., and I'm so glad you all are here to join us. A few quick housekeeping things. You may have noticed when you joined the feed that you came in muted. We're not doing this because we don't want to hear what you have to say, but just so that we don't get background noise, you're automatically muted, but you can send a question to us anytime. Feel free to interrupt by chatting to us, and you can get to that chat function by moving your mouse around, and it's at the bottom right side of your screen. Also, if you would like to be sure that you can see the Ted & Company folks nice and large on your Zoom screen, you can go up to the top right and select Speaker View, which will allow you to see them as kind of the largest picture on your screen for the duration of the webinar. All right. So with no further ado, oh man, all right, yeah, exciting times. I'm going to turn it over to you folks in Virginia, Ted & Company folks, to introduce yourselves. And I'm going to invite you all to say your name, who you are, and your role with this particular production, and how you got involved, why you said yes to joining this particular play. So I'm going to say, Ted, let's start with you on the left, my left, and we'll go left to right.
I'm Ted Swartz. I'm the owner and of the producing company, Ted & Company Theater Works. And Allison Brookins, who's the author to my left, was an intern with my company last summer and began this project. And I became very intrigued with the project. And toward the end of the summer, it seemed as if she was going to have more than just a couple of sketches. She was going to have the beginnings of a very good play. So we started a conversation about me producing the play, my company producing the play. And I'm also an actor in the play because I come with the company.
Package deal.
Yeah.
Thank God.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Phil Weaver-Stace. I am the director of the show. And I got involved because, well, a long time ago, Allison and I made some really scrappy theater together at Goshen College. And I
Scrappy
just
theater? What did
scrappy.
Scrappy? Okay.
It's really scrappy. It wasn't crappy. It might have been crappy, but it was scrappy.
Both.
It was.
Both.
I just finished my Master's of Fine Arts in Theater Directing from Arizona State. And so she got in touch and asked if I would come onto the project. And the other question about why this show in particular, like what interested us about it, I think it's particularly throughout grad school, I had a lot of experiences with using art as a means toward conversation, as a means toward many different things, rather than just sort of like 2 hours of entertainment for rich people. And like, what else does it do? And with this, it was gaining a lot of skills in facilitating difficult conversations, facilitating understandings of people coming to new stories and stuff like that. So this project felt like it would both teach me a lot and also let me continue to develop skills that I had started developing in graduate school. So I was excited to jump on board. And Ted, you know, and Allison, and Michelle. So.
All right. Allison, what about you?
Yeah, I'm Allison Brookins. I am the playwright, and I guess this project is a little bit my fault. So I was a communications major in undergrad and then went on to seminary. And then during seminary, just really started combining my interest in how we talk about things with my interest in theology and activism and how we do things in the world and how we talk about what we do and how we change hearts and minds. And saw a TED show, and I just was pretty much immediately like, this feels like a heartbeat here. There's something here that I would like to learn how to be a part of. And so came into internship with TED, and I'll be talking more about why this project. So I'll stop there for now.
Sure. Don't steal that thunder. I need that.
I'm Michelle Milne. I am performing the roles that Ted is not.
Thank you.
And
Good plan.
No,
Yeah.
Ted's performing the roles that you're not.
and that's true too.
Wait,
of those
wait,
things are
actually,
true.
no one's performing any of the roles.
And I first did a staged reading in Madison about a year
August,
ago,
yeah.
right? Not quite a year ago. So that was my first introduction to the show, and really enjoyed that. And I would say I'm doing this project partly for the people, and also it plugs in really well to some of the things that I'm working on in my own work. I also create theater, direct and write and perform it, and it has a lot of good connections to some of the work that I've been doing around immigration and borders. And I'm learning from Allison. So following her around and going, yes, that was a good idea, I'm going to steal it. Not really, but the topic really I'm passionate about, and I would second what several people have said about the importance of theater being in different communities and approaching theater in a different way, not just on a stage where there's a separation, and this has more of an interactive feel.
And Michelle was the director at Goshen College when Phil and I were both there, so we worked with her as actors and designers as well.
Wait, so when you were making Scrappy Theater, Michelle was your director?
No.
Awkward.
Not her fault.
Yeah, that was solely our fault.
Okay, all right. Well, Michelle, you were kind of leading into this, and several of you were kind of tiptoeing up to the topic that this place surrounds, this idea of the Doctrine of Discovery. And I'm sort of embarrassed to admit that this is a term that I first heard only 3 years ago, even though it clearly, the more I've learned about it, it shapes so many things that I experience and benefit from. So I wonder if you would talk a little bit about how you've come to understand this idea of the Doctrine of Discovery. What does that concept mean to you? How do you describe that to people?
Yeah. So I describe the Doctrine of Discovery as the theological, philosophical, legal framework that has justified theft of land and oppression of indigenous people. So it's sort of a finders keepers idea. It's this idea that the first European Christian country that discovers a piece of land automatically gains legal title, ultimate title to that property. And so this is something that began in the 1500s, and the ramifications, as you said, have continued to roil and broil over, and we here are benefiting from this, from where we have lived and how we have lived there for a very, very long time. And this is continuing also into the present with indigenous groups of people being dispossessed of their land particularly now for extractive resources, so mining and oil removal. And so there's one of the ideas within the Doctrine of Discovery is that of terra nullius, of empty land, so that this land is empty, it is not being used. It's not being used by people who are Christian or by farmers or people who really know how to use the land. This idea of emptiness, sort of a selective blindness. And then, they say that the Doctrine of Discovery has led to the 3 E's of extraction, extinction, and enslavement. So this feels like a sort of a core root of oppression all over the world, and particularly in this country, that this is what racism and patriarchy and US centrism all have their teeth in. So this feels like a really foundational concern.
Sure. Do any of the others of you want to add anything to that? That's a pretty good working definition.
I think I'm with you, Hannah, that the phrase I first heard in that way 2 or 3 years ago, shaped in a way that.
And just sorry to interrupt, but just a quick pause. If you all, the Ted and Company folks, could speak a little closer to the microphone, some folks are having trouble hearing.
Okay, we're all moving up closer to the microphone.
Okay, good.
I think what was a difference for me in sort of had this sort of low-grade understanding of this is the root of a lot of the issues in the country, but to hear it said with such impactful ways is that this is the root of so many other things. So it feels like we're getting to something that not goes beyond the issues of racism and patriarchy, but gets at more of the roots of where it starts. And that feels very, it feels new for a lot of people, I think. And so we're very happy to be a part of that.
Right. Great. And Allison, I know you even pulled in some actual documents that really lay things out. In the play, it sort of feels like hyperbole or like you're exaggerating, but you really took inspiration from very real documents that actually do kind of lay things out just as you've described, kind of taking ownership without much. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the first sketches that you'll see in the play is based on a document called The Requirement, El Requerimiento, which came out of the Spanish Empire in 1513. And that document, I mean, you read it and you're just like, this is absurd. This is like a parody, but it's not, it's real. So it's this document that's just kind of like, hey, here we are. This is who we are. This is who the Pope is. This is who the King and Queen are. Just so you know, you can sign on if you want to. If you don't, we're going to come in and we're going to kill you and take your land. And, you know, just so you know.
To the glory of God.
To the glory of God, yeah. And this was read, just in case that's not enough, this was read, often in Latin, with no translation, from a boat towards an empty shore.
So it wasn't even a requirement that people be there. It just had to be read.
Right.
Had to check that box.
And the phrase that they use frequently in this document, which is in the play, is, we request and require you to consider this. And so when the idea was proposed to me, this document popped into my head. I was just like, that's perfect. That's a comic sketch right there. I don't even have to do anything else. I did do other things with it. But, so that, yeah, like you said, that's one of the foundational documents for the show, is the absurdity of the requirement.
Right. And we're kind of moving into this area as well, but this is a really tragic topic that, as you mentioned, has been responsible for the extermination and enslavement and disenfranchisement of many, many people. So why this particular format, you know, a comic lament, a comic play? How are you holding those things together, the lament and the comedy?
It's been a process of a couple of things. First of all, that my work in theater since I started almost 30 years ago is about finding what's funny in a particular story. And if you start with what's funny in a story, and for many years I did work in biblical story, and when we find what's funny there, you find the humanity in the story. You also find the absurd, and sometimes it's the best way to respond to something that is so tragic, especially historically. St. John Cleese of the Holy Church of Monty Python has said that if something is serious, it needs laughter more than if something is not serious. And he said there's a difference between serious and solemn. And we want to make it clear that what we're doing is not making light of any particular issue. We're using laughter and comedy to find a depth that's really hard to find in any other way. As human beings, we connect to each other when we laugh in a way that you can't replicate in any other way. So that what we're hoping is that this laughter that we're pretty sure is going to happen within the context of the show. We're staking an awful lot on that.
Crossing the fingers.
Yeah.
It makes us laugh.
It makes us laugh. But within that context, you recognize, we laugh for different reasons. We laugh when we're surprised. We laugh when we're delighted. We laugh when we recognize truth. We laugh when we recognize ourselves. So this one sort of fits in the latter two of those. We laugh when we recognize the truth of something. There's also a bit of a barb in much of the laughter, which is what we're hoping is that there's laughter within the context of something that feels so absurd, so it is funny. And then you realize that it is the root of something else, and it makes you feel something different. And we feel that laughter is still one of the best ways to open a mind. Again, Cleese says that a laughter is the quickest way to open a closed mind. So that if we can use laughter to help people understand a difficult concept or something that they haven't thought about, then we've done part of what the intent of the show is. And this is kind of what we all know, is theater and play. So while play, I think Phil said it well, that we want to do, Michelle, somebody said it really well back here.
I remember it really well.
Really well. I remember it so well. That theater's more than just 2 hours of entertainment for rich people.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what the company's been about, and what most of us are about, or all of us are about, in giving theater to as wide a group of people as possible. And in that way, you get to talk about many different subjects. So theater is still an amazing tool and mode of transportation to give information to people and also make them feel. And that's a huge part of why we do this.
And so you also mentioned that the subtitle is a Comic Lament.
Mm-hmm.
And so one thing that I've really enjoyed about the script is that it is comic. Many parts of it are comic, but there is also a lament part of it, and there's also a reflective part of it, and there are multiple styles that Allison has brought in. And so one part that I've been working on is a movement vocabulary that also goes along with this piece, which is another way of feeling things. And so sometimes we get things through words, and sometimes we get things through a movement or through a visual or through an image. So that's something else we've been working at. So bringing these different languages together in the hopes that people can plug into different things at different times, I think is one really strong thing about this script.
Sure. That's great. And just a reminder to those of you listening, feel free to send a chat or question anytime. We'll probably save most of them till the end, but whenever something occurs to you, feel free to chat it to us. But I wonder if you all could say a little bit about where you're at in the production process. I know, Allison, we were talking about the fact that you have about there are 3 weeks before the Orlando convention, which is where you're kind of going to end this first tour. But talk about the timeline you're working on right here and the work that lies ahead of you right now.
Yeah, we just, so we are starting the second week of a 3-week process. And as the process has continued, we're right now, this week is a lot of like memorization and putting things in order. As the director, a lot of my job is understanding the sort of like organization of first starting with a little bit of movement and understanding where people are moving on stage, moving into memorization, moving into tightening different moments and making sort of like a really tight 1-hour piece of art. But I think it was important to me coming into this, thinking about the process, about setting aside time for reflection within our process. So it was obvious to me that Allison was bringing in a lot of knowledge about this topic. So for the first, in the beginning of our rehearsal, each morning we have like a reflection that Allison will bring in a question, and we're actually all writers. We've all done a lot of writing. And so we'll sit and free write a little bit and ask about, and think about the play, think about the topic and everything. Because if we are bringing this show to other people and we're going to ask them to enter a space of reflection, enter a space of lament, enter a space of understanding self versus story and all this stuff, then we also need to be able to be in that space during our process. So we're acting not only as artists, but also understanding as facilitating a space afterwards, and trying to understand our own place as settlers in creating the story. So the process is not just about art creation, but a lot. I've made space for being able to deepen that a little bit through our process.
And Allison has talked a lot about the importance too of and you maybe want to talk about this more, but about the fact that it's not just a 1-hour performance, but that there will be something after that involves the audience, that there's an interactive piece there. And so we've been working on that as part of those reflections of how do we want to use that time, that space of response and of connecting more face-to-face in some ways with us with the audience and also the audience with each other. I don't know if you want to say any more about that, Allison.
We're thinking about ways really to get, this is part of like the movement dance that Michelle is bringing to the show is influencing this as well. How do we get people's bodies involved? Because lament is a physical thing. Like when you hear lament, we generally think like keening or other very, very physical feelings and physical outbursts,
which we don't do much.
We don't do not much keening. So how do we create some kind of ritual or practice or collaborative something to get people out of their seats, to get them moving a little bit, to get Mennonite people up and moving a little bit, to help people move their minds and bodies and souls into a place where we can lament. And also one of the, moving back to your last question just a little bit, the power of lament. And like, the reason that I wanted to focus on that is that we so often jump past like feeling and acknowledging and understanding straight into, well, what do I do? And this can be a way of not going into the really hard work of lament and of recognition and understanding. And it can also be well, if you don't have a solution for me, I'm just not going to pay attention, because there's so many things with no solutions. Why should I pay attention to this? And so wanting to encourage people, to make it possible for people to be in a place of lament, because in that place, listening to and hearing input from the people who are affected by this, from Indigenous people in our communities in our country, we can hear those voices better from a place of lament. So it's not that we stop at lament, but it's how does lament change what we then are capable of, and how does that affect our relationships with other people and the action that can then come out of that.
Well put.
Well, thanks. Write that down.
Are you like building your response interaction right now?
Yeah, we're making
Hey, well, I think you're also, I mean, this is great. You guys are just like moving right into the next thing. It's just beautiful. This is working out, but
We're all writers.
I guess that's right. Good flow. But who are you hoping will be the audience for this play, and how are you hoping they respond? I mean, Ted, you kind of mentioned that people respond very differently and we laugh at different things. So obviously there'll be a range of responses, but what are those bigger things you're hoping for, those bigger movements?
We will go anywhere that hires us. So
Hint, right?
Yes, our intended audience is everyone.
Okay.
Ted has 30 years of experience and audiences with whom he has built a rapport and trust. And so we are hoping that some of these communities might be like, oh, well, we don't know what this is, but it's a Ted show. So they might bring him in. So hoping that it could be some people who have really not ever encountered or thought about this. We also have on this tour audiences that are composed of people and activists and organizations that have a lot of contact with Indigenous persons and groups. And so we're going to have a lot of different people. Really what I wrote it towards is people who do not have very much familiarity with the Doctrine of Discovery, and who can be pushed, challenged, encouraged towards a better understanding, and like I said, towards lament.
Yeah, one of the reflections that Allison did last week, which we felt was really helpful, was actually we took time to write down all of the reactions we felt like people might have to the show, which sort of spoke to not just what we hoped would happen, but some of what we expect could happen, which sort of brought out feelings of what it means to be defensive or fearful or rationalizing or denial or sort of like putting off of self or escapism or any of that stuff. And so what we're hoping for is like with, as Allison so well put it, the space of lament, to invite people into a space of lament, sort of like lets you let go of some of that stuff, let go of the like, well, this isn't about me, or, you know, something that pushes off, and says, no, like, let's all sit in this room together with this. So in writing that, it's sort of, the hope is an invitation into that space, I think. Yeah,
and so our primary audience is white settler Mennonite people. And then Christian people more broadly, and then just people. So yeah. So our main audience. Order,
yeah, right.
Our main audience is white settler folks like us. So this is a chance for us to do some of our own work and to do a first level education. One of our partners in the Dismantling the Doctrine of Discovery Coalition said that her work is like Native 101 is what she called it. And so it's like doing that very first level of education. So we're hoping that this can fulfill some of that need as well.
And you mentioned just now the Doctrine of Discovery, or the Dismantling the Doctrine of Discovery Coalition, or the Coalition for Dismantling. I forget exactly which direction it is, but is the coalition committed to dismantling the Doctrine of Discovery?
Dismantling Coalition, just take the first and the last words. Dismantling Coalition.
Yes, there we go. But I know they have been important accountability partners for you, and this is a group that includes people from Canada and the United States, Anabaptist folks kind of working to do some education around the Doctrine of Discovery. And I know we've talked about this before, but I wonder if you would say a little bit about accountability in this writing process. This is obviously a topic that has disproportionately affected people of color. How are you accountable to them in this writing and production process? And how are you continuing to be, I guess?
Yeah. And this is the question that has been the one that we've struggled with from the very, very first day. And when not struggled, like worked with, been challenged by. And I thought you were so yeah, this project was, I was in conversation with a friend who is part of the coalition, and the coalition also, for those who don't know, is, like I said, a group of Anabaptist people who are, it's a group of indigenous and settler Anabaptist people who came together out of the Mennonite Women Conference 3 years ago, and decided that they wanted to have more sustained work around undoing this at various levels. So they work at the level of policy and lobbying in DC. We are on the arts committee as TED and Company. So there's a constituency engagement coalition. So there's all of these different ways where the people who are interested come together and then engage in this work in their own communities. So a friend of mine who's on this coalition was talking to me right before I went out to TED, and I was saying how I wanted to have some sort of a focus for my writing while I was there, because I didn't really know what I was doing. And she said, like, the coalition has thought about asking TED to write some stuff for us. Would you like to do that? And I, like I said, immediately thought of this document and thought, yeah, I could write a sketch out of that. I could do that. So from the start, I had a couple people who are on the coalition who I talked with and who like put me in touch with original documents and books. And so I did a lot of my own reading during the summer as well as writing. And so kind of like what I figured out my model was just recently was that like I would go to my writing group here in Harrisonburg and be like, okay, here's a thing I've made. And they're like, okay, you're very passionate. This is, important work. It's not very funny. It's not super great writing. So I was like, okay. And I would go back and I would write something, and then I would take it to my friends on the coalition. They're like, well, that's funny, but you're missing this point. So I'd be like, okay, and I would come back and I would write some more. And so it was kind of this like back and forth between the people on the coalition that I would talk with and the people in the arts community who I would talk with. And so being accountable to both those, to the quality of the writing and to the quality of the activism, and bringing it together into this. So then a big moment for us was this last January when Ted and I flew to Kansas to go to the annual meeting of the Dismantling Coalition, during which time we did a full reading, got an hour and a half of workshopping on the script. And going into that, we were really like, all right, we've been doing this project. We don't know if they're going to say, yes, we love it, or if they're going to say, no, this is not the direction we want you to go, or if they're going to say, no, we think this is horrible. And
3 options. Only 3
only
options.
3. And so we really like held it open and tried to hold it lightly. It was hard. But to say that if they say no, then it's no. And we go back to the drawing board, or I just go get a pastoring job.
Find another board.
Which I did anyway. Find the new board. So we went with a lot of trepidation, took a lot of courage, at least on my part, to hold it that loosely, and ended up getting a lot of affirmation from them for the direction that the project was taking and the idea of the project. And some admonitions and changes. And admonition and changes and stuff that really sharpened the show very, very well.
Yes.
Changed the ending of the show after that to something that bites a little bit harder, which is a really good idea. And so right now, and accountability is something that's never over. It's not like we're like, okay, great, we're good, we can now do anything that we want. with the rest of our lives. It's something that is going to be ongoing, and with every organization that we come to do a play, there's a new relationship. And each venue that we have has their own relationship with the community around them. And so they have to work, everybody needs to work with as much integrity as they can. And that is what's complicated. And I think that's kind of what's beautiful about the project, is that doing it right requires us to be in really good communication, which is really hard.
I thought about,
really important.
yeah,
really important.
You talked about holding it lightly, and I was like trying to think about how I've thought about holding the project, and I would say we're holding it bravely and humbly, both. That you have to hold it bravely in that you're stepping into a really difficult conversation, and we have to put in a bunch of work that we're like, working on lines and going up there and doing work. So we're bravely stepping into a conversation. You have to hold it humbly, and then even after you've done all this work, you have to be ready to hear anything about it. You have to be ready to step into a room and someone says, this is the wrong thing that you're doing, or this feels really bad, or this is a particular way. So you have to bravely step in, but also be humble about being able to listen. Because if we lose that ability to listen, I mean, we lose the point of this whole thing, I think.
Yeah. And part of the beauty of having a live show that is an hour play and then an hour of engagement response time, virtual time, is that this is, it's not static. It's a very dynamic process. It can change, and it has changed. And, from the very beginning, I've been writing this with a lot of collaborative input from a lot of people. And so that feels really natural to me. Like now in the rehearsal process, like they're rehearsing and Phil's directing, and I'm like, let's try this line, let's change this, let's tweak that. Sometimes Michelle says, can we please change this? And I'm like, no!
I never ask.
Yeah.
You just forget a line.
I just forget the
He
line.
just memorized it. He just
makes it
memorized it.
Immediately.
He just changes it, and Allison doesn't notice. That's what I know.
So the passive aggression is not completely gone in this process. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's it.
So yeah, that is, and this is something too that we're kind of seeing this initial tour of 6 shows as a pilot tour. So we're going to be working with Elaine Enns, who is a restorative justice practitioner out of Canada and California, who's part of the Bartimaeus Cooperative Ministries. So she's been doing work with Russian Mennonite identity and indigenous identity and stories, and bringing these narratives together for a really long time. So she's going to travel with us and empty her wisdom upon us.
Her prodigious knowledge upon us. Yes.
Oh, and C. John Hildebrand said Elaine is his hero. So Elaine has.
She is a wonderful woman.
Join the group.
Yeah,
Join the group.
Yeah.
That's right. Well, we do want to open it up now for questions from those of you who have been listening in so far. And we do have one first from Christy Zabriskie, and she says, Allison, I'm wondering about your conversation with Mark Charles. You told our Minneapolis group that he had some very serious concerns.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So how did we get connected with him?
Brian McLaren is a mutual friend, writer and speaker, and he's a good friend of mine, and he's a good friend of Mark's. And I first learned some of this conversation through Mark at a session that I was at 3 years ago. I've not had a lot of personal conversations, but friend of a friend, and Brian suggested that we talk, Alice and I, with Mark about process, the issue, and whether or not there could be some intersection once the play is finished with his work and our work. So that's how we got to know Mark a little bit.
Yeah, so Ted and I had a conversation with him last fall, like pretty early, when I still just had my first draft of the play, so it was not yet as workshopped as it is now.
And we had not gone to the coalition gathering in January yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so we had a conversation with him, talked a little bit about the play. I watched one of his video lectures, which is very, very good if anybody wants to look at it. I think he uses Lamentations, but he uses a lot of biblical text to encourage people to understand and take this very seriously. And so in our conversation, he had a lot of concerns about use of humor. And I think some of that was coming out of, we did not have trust built between us. We didn't know each other. He had never seen any of Ted's work. And so it was just like, had exactly the thought that most people would have, which is, wait, you're making humor about the Doctrine of Discovery. Like that puts up some red flags for people for whom this is very, very not funny.
I think in part, to be fair to Mark and to our conversation, he said numerous times, I've never thought about it that way.
Yeah.
It didn't seem as if he was not willing to have a conversation about that, or even see the play. We're hoping that
he was intrigued.
We're hoping that we can bring him to a show at some point. Mark's perspective is interesting in that he feels as if white settler culture has an illness, and there's a cure that can only be brought by representatives of indigenous nations. And so he feels like he's bringing health to a sick society. And that's a really wonderful and interesting perspective to come from. So I think what he's coming at is how would the approach that we're doing and his approach connect. I think that was a lot of his concern. I think he was also grateful that there are other people working on the conversation.
He said, anybody who's working on this, great.
Yeah.
However you're doing it. So, yeah, I hope that relationship can be rekindled at some point.
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I was just going to say that the crossover for Mark and hopefully our work is that I think I'm right in saying that Mark works a lot, if not mostly, with faith communities, so that there would be some, I think, natural overlap in the work that we do.
And hearing you talk about Mark's perspective reminds me of, I got to go to a meeting earlier this winter where Ruby Sales spoke, a civil rights activist, a person who's done a lot of work on anti-oppression. And she did talk about also this spiritual sickness that white settlers and white people are experiencing. And I mean, would you say in some ways that your work is also trying to name that just in a different way, or how are you taking that seriously? How does that maybe enter in, that this is something that white settlers need to own, that we do have some sickness, racism ingrained in us? And your play does tell some settler stories of Mennonites too. Yeah. It raises that complexity.
Well, two things. I don't want to talk too much on somebody the opportunity, but I think part of what I said initially about understanding this at a different level, not saying that this is just part of an ongoing trauma that we have created, not just to the land and indigenous tribes, but to ourselves. That was significant for me in saying that this is maybe the root of all of that. And so this idea of American exceptionalism that we have been told through our books and our histories and in our culture and in our churches, that we are the shining light on the hill, or however you want to describe this blessed by God kind of thing, when in reality, the exact reverse could be true. That these traumatic events have caused trauma to the perpetrators in a way that we haven't yet begun to understand. And that there's cultural, generational trauma of perpetration that is affecting us in ways that we don't know. And so who knows how that might, I mean, maybe that's the reason we have the biggest war machine in history, and will continue to do so, because we started that way. And now maybe better historians than I might say that most cultures start that way, but I don't think that's necessarily true. So that's my spin.
Yeah, it seems like, just in thinking about this, I don't come from this, thinking about sickness is a new way of thinking about it. But I think for me, in experiencing a lot of what it means to approach issues of racism and issues of oppression, is feeling like to maybe the majority of people who are white, being named as white is in itself a fear. Like, you can name Black people, you can name brown people, you can name all of these things, but if you yourself are named as white, it hits at a really deep, scary level, and you have to go through like so much processing and self-work. And one of the things that happens, it feels like when that happens, is you go and you like ask to be absolved by people who don't look like you. You're like, absolve me of this pain, absolve me of this pain. I'm like, I don't want to deal with this.
I feel bad.
I feel bad. Yeah, we talk about the feel bad monster. The feel bad monster.
Yeah.
Like we're gonna do this play, and then the feel bad monster is gonna come into the room, and we're all gonna like, I feel bad about these issues. And so
maybe if we all just sing.
Yeah, let's just sing the feel bad monster away, and it'll fall asleep, and we'll like play, and we'll like do this nice little thing, and then we'll walk away, and we'll be absolved.
Yeah.
And I think that feeling, that like, it feels like evidence to me, like what it means to be like, oh, you're a white guy. I'm like, oh, no, I'm not. No, I'm not. I'm not a white guy. No, you can't. You're like, no, yeah, you are. And so what that means to like live with that, accept that, and sit with that for a while, I think takes some lamentation, and it takes sort of us doing the work, not shipping it off to someone else, not asking someone else to do the work. I mean, one of my friends was like, every time a white person asks me to like talk about my story, it's like they're enslaving me all over again. And that we're not only going to make you do our land work, we're also going to make us feel better. Like, make us feel better about doing it.
The emotional work too. Sure.
Yeah, exactly. The emotional work. Well, you can work the land, you can build our houses, and then you can do our emotional work too. And we can ship everything away. And so this is a way of us taking ownership of our work and saying, this is the work that we need to do. And hopefully the audiences that see this can join in that work a little bit, I think.
Right. Well, another question from Doug Luganbill in the audience, who says, what audience response that you can imagine frightens you the most?
I just lost it.
Dream big here.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, yeah, do you want to answer that?
Oh, yeah, that's right. We're going to be the ones.
Yeah, you're the ones who are performing.
Yeah.
We're the ones that are going to face the reactions, whatever they are.
Yeah.
There are multiple reactions that I think I fear. Some of them because I have them too, and I don't want to admit it. So, and we've touched on some of those, but I think maybe one of the hardest is defensiveness, or justification. Like, well, that was a long time ago, or those sorts of things. Partly because that's a long conversation. I see this piece as a seed of something, and we can't solve it all and fix it,
and we don't try,
and we don't want to. Like, yeah, but yeah, I guess that's my first answer. I'll think while you answer.
Okay. I think that, to be really, really honest, a lot of my fear has to do, well, first of all, some of us go into theater because we want people to like us. We go into comedy because we want people to like us. Humor has been a defensive thing to break a barrier between people. So I never feel as if I want to go on stage and upset anybody. I want, first of all, people to like me. That's the first thing that comes in my head. So that's my default, and that's not something I'm always proud of, because that keeps you from being honest sometimes. But if I'm really, really honest about my greatest fear, I think it's about misrepresenting or feeling that people, an audience member, or if Indigenous people feel like we're not representing the issues and the story well enough, with enough honor, with enough care. That's, I think, my greatest fear. I've done enough shows in the recent years that have irritated people, and there are some audience members that feel like I have not listened to them. Talking about, Phil said about listening. I know there are people feel like I haven't listened to them because they feel like they are a minority voice in a room, or I get emails. But I think for us, I'm ready to accept those if we feel as if the people whose story we're trying to tell well and correctly feel honored by the story. Then you can accept anything else. You can accept anger, defensiveness. So that's my greatest fear. So, and then remembering that scene 8, which is really hard.
Yeah.
I don't know, scene 4.
Scene 4 is pretty hard too. Okay.
Yeah, I think my greatest.
See what I did there? I tried to make light of my whole conversation by making a joke. And
it almost worked, but then I came
Almost there, I
back.
just came back.
My fears are around similar to Ted's, and also like my fear from the beginning has been I am seeking to use a voice and a communication mode to work towards justice in some way, to like dip one toe further into the pool of justice in some way, and the feel that I will instead hurt people, hurt the people that I'm trying to work with, and that this show will be insufficient for so many, that this show does a thing, it does not do everything, and it does not do enough, and it never will, it never can. And so trying to figure out how to do this and do it well, and try to get it out to as many people as possible, and try to get as many people to dip that toe in with me as possible. But yeah, I have a lot of fears around the insufficiency of the whole thing.
Yep.
Yeah.
They said they should come
Yes.
first. I agree.
Okay, good.
Well, and this might be a curveball of a question, but you all are writers. So how do you think about endings? You mentioned several times, we're not going to tie this up in a pretty package for people. We're not going to solve this. And, you know, I mean, if somebody has the magic method to solve the roots of the Doctrine of Discovery, that, you know, call in now. But yeah, how do you think about endings? How do you work at that?
Should we tell them the last word of the play?
Yes.
Oh,
The last word of
teaser.
the play? Well.
I get
In fact, that's the last line.
The last line.
That's the last line.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I can speak a little bit to it, thinking about the arc of it. But there's sort of the play, as I see it, is a series of people who feel like they have the answers, learning that they don't. There's a lot of seeds that they're like these people who stand up and they feel like they have the answers, and slowly they realize that they don't have all the answers, and they fight against, and they like answer for answer for answer gets a deeper question, deeper question, deeper question. And so I think toward the end, one of the things that we're thinking about is how do we create this piece of art that ends, and the ending is an invitation to sit in the space of a question, and the question is what makes you lament. And so this is not, we are bringing no solutions to this. We are bringing a space of awareness, I think. And so and the last scene, although I won't give anything away or talk about it a little bit, but it has someone who is sitting in the situation that we're sitting in, not quite sure what to do about it. Sort of has run out of solutions, attempts all the easy ones, none of them work, and is left to sit in it, and that is how the show ends. And so there's no, we don't have, everyone come down and pray. There's no prayer room. You know, I don't know.
It sort of ends with the now what.
Yeah, it ends with a now what.
I also just briefly say that part of what the brilliance of the play is there's two arcs in the story. There's a what we might call an interior arc. Tell me if I'm getting this wrong, but there's a story of Mennonite immigration that ends up in Kansas, with a trauma story that's related to it coming out of Russia, Manitoba, and Kansas. And there's this deep-rooted love of this particular land that has its roots in loss and migration and discovery. And what we learn is that story, but it's overlaid by, there's a deeper story behind that. And so that paradox that's created by characters that we want you to feel deeply about and for, there's another chapter there. And so it's that chapter that sits in the I don't know what's next phase.
The one way I talk about it is that it's, we hold our own narratives close to ourselves. And the play is hoping to not knock that all out and replace it with something new. First of all, because like there is no overarching indigenous narrative that we can somehow say like this is how it really is. And we don't try to do that. but to rather put these into relationship with each other and make them be related in some way, make them find some way to talk to each other. So putting stories next to each other rather than replacing one story with some other story.
Because they are related.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We don't think of them that way, but they're very related.
Sure. Well, we do have a couple comments coming in here. A few things. First, Christy said, thanks for your response. And she wonders about the issue of building trust with Mark Charles and with others who may not appreciate different approaches to humor. And she mentions that Mark is of both Navajo and Dutch Calvinist descent. So he kind of holds together the native and settler perspectives in one person in some ways. And then also a comment from C. John just saying, responding with lament for what the Doctrine of Discovery has done and continues to do to Native people seems like the first and appropriate response, sort of agreeing with what you all have been saying. And also mentioning that Elaine's work seems to be pointing to lament and what it continues to do to white settler folks. And then a question from Donna Minter, who asks, given the particular sensitivity to these issues in Minneapolis recently,
Yes.
how will Native American voices be represented at the June 29th performance?
Yeah, so one of the things that we've been wondering about and concerned about and thinking about and excited about the potential for is what we have been struggling with is the question of how do we do our own work and how do we encourage audiences to do our own work, and how do we ask local indigenous-led organizations to in some way be a part of that with us, and not without having any indigenous or people of color come and feel betrayed by like, oh, I'm just in another space where white people are lamenting their own story. How do we not have that feeling of betrayal? How do people know exactly what they're getting into when they come? Mm-hmm. And so this is something that we're continuing to work on and figure out.
Yeah, well, I think part of the position of like the idea of the 101-ness of our work is that it sort of steps into a space of inviting people in who know very little, and we sort of can give the first seat of this, that we in a certain way can join with indigenous-led organizations in helping teach and talk about these issues. We don't come with solutions, or we don't come with these things, that we see ourselves as a very early of coming in very early on people's interactions with this. And it feels as though naturally the next step after lamentation, because it's sort of like making other people oversee the process of lamentation, is like creating more and more work. And it also in some ways centers our story of like settlers, that, hey, can you come and center us, how I'm feeling about stealing your land rather than how you're feeling about it. And so that centering work feels like this is work that settlers need to do. And as a way of moving forward after lament or in later, when you want to learn how to do it, you want to learn how to change something, you go and talk to an indigenous-led organization. We are not sitting there like, and we together as white settlers are going to make the plan about how to solve this. That is not the step, or that is not the area we want to step into.
And this is part of what I was talking about with like that. What happens in lament is that it changes how you listen, and it changes the relationships that it's possible for you to have. And so one idea that we have is to have some indigenous-led organization be present to give literature about the organization, to give a talk, to simply be there for people to talk to. But yeah, trying to balance that, like, okay, you want a next step? Here's an organization that's doing some next steps. Don't do your own thing. You don't have to figure it exactly out. Here's a group that is working. You can join in. So like power with rather than power that is replacing. I'm just going to ask Madonna's specific question about Minneapolis.
So I'm going a little away from that, but we'll come back. I was just going to say another thing we've talked about, and this is coming from some of my movement background, is how some of my movement practice is about recognizing where you are before you can move forward. You have to know where you are before you can go somewhere else. And part of that we talked about, if you have a pain in your knee and you just try to ignore it and force your way to like, play basketball anyway, your knee is going to get worse and worse. And so I see this as we have to look at this wound, which Ted was talking about, that we also, as white people, as settlers, have. We have to look at that wound, take it in, be with that before we can start moving forward. Just to put another way of looking at it out there.
Well, in some ways, it's like the idea. Are you thinking of this play almost like a white caucus in anti-racism work, where white people kind of step back to process their questions by themselves and to not put that onto people of color? Yeah. And I wonder then, I mean, how are you being explicit then in your communication about this play and about who you hope comes, that's part of the purpose?
We also expect different audiences in different places to be very different. So like right now we're just working off of me calling and saying, hey, you're a friend of mine, I have this contact, we have this show, would you like to host us? And so different areas do that for different reasons, for like, oh yeah, we know Ted, or oh yeah, this is a topic that we're really interested in. So Minneapolis, which is one of the specific ones, we have a couple people I think represented from there, is one where there's just so much energy around working through this. And so there's lots and lots of people on the planning committee who have lots of contacts with local justice organizations. And so we're expecting that audience to be different than in Goshen, Indiana.
Or Harrisonburg.
Yeah. So we're going to make mistakes. We are gonna bungle this up most likely. And this is going to be a learning process to figure out how to best be in communication and how to best talk about it. So so we hope for some grace and we hope for some learning. And we hope that each place that we're in can be a part of us making this better and bigger.
Ted, did you have a question you wanted to pose to Donna specifically as a follow-up?
No, I just wanted to make sure we answered her question.
And Donna, I'm gonna unmute. Go ahead and unmute you if you wanna follow up at all.
Okay. Yeah, and maybe this is specifically to the group in Minneapolis to find. I don't know exactly how this all got organized to do it, but I know John and Christy, and there's some other people working on it, and about what Native folks have been told about it and invited, or I mean, the first thing when I heard about it, and I from the get-go I thought, oh, this is an I made the assumption that it was Doctrine of Discovery 101. Let's open people's eyes, particularly white people's eyes, to this story. And I thought about, in the work that I'm doing with the Minnesota Peacebuilding Leadership Institute, we had invited about a year ago, we showed the movie Doctrine of Discovery by Sheldon Wolfchild, and he ended up coming to the showing of it and was, very interested in answering questions about why he had made this movie, which is an excellent movie. And then also provided that as an opportunity to sell his film so that people could then take this and educate others, which is, so what I hear you saying with the play is you're trying to create, this isn't, you're instigating change. You're having an event to instigate change. And so to maximize that instigation is, who are the other people in the local community that can be connected to it to then fully even more instigated. And I know that some of Ted and Company's shows are videotaped, and I don't know what the plan is for this, but it seems to me connecting with people locally who can go, yeah, this is my reaction as a Native person, and here's another way that people can take this information out and share it with others. And that's my understanding. That's what Sheldon's been working on doing that's why he made the movie, is not only for Native folks to learn about it, particularly young people that go, oh my gosh, I didn't know this was part of my history, but then also wake up, white Christian church. This is a part of your history. And if you really believe in Jesus, then you better get with the program and pay attention to history. So, and then I have other Native friends that I work with in my work, but it just seems to me that you want to have not only folk partners there, Native partners there, to react to it, but also and be a part of that, but then also to be able to help go, here's what we've got going on in Minneapolis and St. Paul that can help you all spread this part of the gospel.
Yeah.
So those are just my thoughts about it.
I think that's exactly it. One of the things that we're working through with logistically is we will have to depend upon the host,
right,
to be able to contact, to connect us to those groups, or maybe that's the work that they do as part of hosting. So we're going to try to encourage as much as possible. It's going to be difficult for us to make all of those initial contacts. So that's why we depend upon, and as Allison, I think, said very well, people will deal differently within their own communities about how well they do that. And in depending on, I think, I'm thinking about Virginia here and how different it feels sometimes to the West and the Midwest in terms of conversations around this. It's going to feel, when I go back to my home area in Eastern Pennsylvania, it's going to be like, oh, I had no idea that's why our junior high was named that way. And there will probably be less activism happening there because, well, just because of history. And so it will be different there, and we would expect that it would be adaptable to communities as much as possible. I think that's the great thing about theater is, as Allison said before, we can fix things, we can change things, because we'll be different a year from now. So the play will be different a year from now. The writer, the director, and the actors will all be different.
And really, yeah, like we can do a lot of pointing. We can say, okay, you're aware, you're interested. Here is a really great Sunday school curriculum that the Dismantling Coalition has put out. Here is a series of 3 magazines that Common Word has put out in Canada that's all about this topic and about helping churches engage with it. Here is a documentary. Here's another documentary. We can do a lot of that kind of pointing. And also we can remember that we are a theater company. First and foremost, we are a theater company. And so we tell stories. And my experience so far with this story has been that there's a lot of hooks in it. After doing, just like for one example, after doing the reading that Michelle was part of in Madison, my best friend's little brother called me and was like, I'm in this Latin American literature class, and the stuff that we're reading is really reminding me of that play thing that you did. What was that called? What was that? And he remembered the term Doctrine of Discovery, and he was like making that connection for himself. And so that is what I hope can happen with this, is that a new language can be introduced, a new set of vocabulary can be introduced, and then when people next hear, they're like, right, that's like that thing. And so some of those like new boxes in our minds can be created where information goes when it's taken in. And so yeah, I think that basically answered the question. It will look different everywhere.
And I know we're approaching the end of our time, so I want us to wrap up. But see, John, you had a little comment, a follow-up to Donna. I'm going to unmute you here too, if you want to give a little word about what's happening in Minneapolis.
Yeah, can you all hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. This is not my normal laptop, so I just want to make sure it worked here. So, just wanted to thank Donna for her comments, and also for her organization's support of the show. We are working with a partner, which is called Makoche Ikichupi, which stands for Land Recovery in Dakota, and this is an organization that is run by Wazi Watton, who is the author of a book called "What Does Justice Look Like," which is all about Dakota history and about the vision of sort of recovering land and identity within Dakota communities. And we are also inviting Sheldon Wolfchild to be a part of the evening making that contact right now and hoping that I'm actually hoping that we can have a follow-up event after the play where Sheldon can come to Calvary, which is my home church, and show the film and speak to folks. So yeah, so that we're hoping this will be a catalyst for further discussion at my church and beyond. So thanks a lot, Donna, for your question.
Looking forward to meeting you, C. John. Thank you for all your work.
Same.
All right.
And Ted, I think, are we brothers? Are we twins separated by at birth or something?
Yeah, I'm liking this guy a lot.
So this is like you're gonna need a selfie in a few weeks when the show reaches Minneapolis. Well, I want to thank you all for joining. A couple quick shout outs. We definitely want to give a shout out. We've mentioned them several times to the coalition working on dismantling the Doctrine of Discovery. If you want to learn more about them, you can find them at dofdmenno.org. And Ted and Co folks, where can people catch this show? And if they want to learn more and get in touch with you, how can they do that?
Our website is tedandcompany.com. You can look there for our schedule and see all of the shows on this tour and any other shows as well. We're also on Facebook, Ted and Company. Follow us there and we'll post, well, when I'm around, we post a lot of pictures. When I'm not around, there's a few less. We have our premiere show in Harrisonburg on the 24th of this month. And then over the next 10 days, we go to Chicago to do a show at the church that I'm about to become the pastor of. Then we go up to Winnipeg to do a show up there, back down to Minneapolis, and then 2 shows in the Goshen area, and then flying down to Orlando to do our final show at Mennonite Church USA's annual convention. And then that's not the final show. I said it was the final, but that was a lie. We will be looking for more shows. So anyone who's interested can give us a ring and we can put something together where we can work with wherever people are at, whatever venue they have, whatever their level of interest is. Tell your friends.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well,
You're
thank you to you all for making time in the midst of this 3 weeks of production here. I know it's a tight calendar, so tight timeline, so thanks for making time. And for all those of you listening in, we did record this session. We're going to get it up on the Mennonites YouTube feed, so if you want to share this conversation with others, it will be there in the morning, and we'll post it on our Facebook page for the Mennonite too. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you for everyone for coming.
See you soon.
Thank you.